Welcome to part two of Paul Cézanne discussion that we're having based on his exhibition, The Last 10 Years of His Life at the Museum of Modern Art. I'm Don Gray. We're going to get right to the pictures, and we'll get there in just a moment. But what we're basically talking about is the underlying emotionalism in Paul Cézanne that gives fire, that fuels the intellectual sense of structure, his search for structure. And I have the feeling that in his late works, all through his career, there is this emotional conflict and the desire to overcome it by imposing this sense of structure on it. At certain points, they work in a beautiful equilibrium. At some points, one will dominate over the other. Early in his career, emotionalism predominates. Late in his at mid-career, there's a beautiful balance. And I think, again, late in his career, we'll see emotionalism dominating again, with his newfound structural vision very close behind. Okay, let's go to the first picture. And we saw it briefly in an earlier show, and we won't discuss it at great length, but it's an early painting, Temptation of St. Anthony, about 1869 or so, and expresses some of Cézanne's problems in dealing with his own sexual appetites, and expresses some of the dark, moody power, naked, creative, raw, clumsy at times power that this man had. He was an absolute emotional, creative dynamo. And of course, people laughed at these pictures. You know, you see the woman at the lower left with her fanny as if under a spotlight, which emphasizes, you know, the sexual aspects of it. You know, it's his attempt at chiaroscuro, you know, the obscuring of certain parts of the body or other forms in shadow, spotlighting certain others. But there's a lusty, full development of the form in a very painterly way that will be with him always, although somewhat disguised in mid-period. Okay, we'll go to the next picture. In the late 1870s, I think, you know, it's not, we won't worry about the dates too much. It's in the 1870s, mid to late 1870s, entitled Bacchanal. And here we see, again, the sense of sexual struggle. It's far from a delicate lovemaking. It's a battle. It sounds like, you know, you could almost hear cats squalling in the alley, if that isn't too indelicate, to get across some of the strength of feeling in the picture. Of course, style-wise, he's changed a great deal. He's painted with Pissarro. He's gone through Impressionism, and is beginning to formulate his own version of it with deft structural touches. But there still is this sense of emotional turmoil and power that ties in with his own personal life, and perhaps feeling some of the sense of pressure of creeping modern society, as we've discussed at earlier times. Okay, we go to the next picture. And in the late 1880s, we find another version of The Bathers, and we find a certain difference of feeling. We find a quieter sense of order, almost a certain ritual expectancy as they wait almost for something to happen. Gone is the sense of lust or sexual conflict or sexual combat. There's still emotionalism in the picture. Look at the rippling line as he seeks to define the forms of the figures. Look at the looping shadows. Look at the tree trunk on the far right that just diagonally tears out of the picture. Incredibly dynamic. We must point out that in the former picture, Bacchanal, in this picture, The Bathers in the 1880s, and in his Great Bathers, which we'll see in a moment, we won't go to it yet, the Bathers, there is this opening of the vista in the center part of the picture as they look through, as they begin to look through to find something beyond. And I believe that Cézanne, this is a symbolic statement of Cézanne, looking for an answer, looking for a meaning in his life, looking for a goal. It's the idea of a goal. We're going to see it in his series of views of Gardanne, the town, and his Mount Saint-Victoire. So keep it in mind, we're looking through, and there are certain symbolic elements come in. There are often faces, if I can just point. Look at this basic shape here of a face. closed eye, nose area, mouth. It just, I believe it happens unconsciously, and I'm not quite sure why, except that it somehow reflects his own inner emotional state, perhaps some desire or goal or something unfulfilled that finds expression in the pictures. Okay, let's go to the next one. His late great bathers. This one is not at the Museum of Modern Art, where there is the final 10 years of Cézanne's painting on exhibit, and we try to be gracious and thank the Museum of Modern Art for their gracious loan of some of these photographs of the exhibition. The late great bathers, let me draw your attention to the sense of vista through the center of the picture, suggesting some goal, whether it's in terms of personal development from foreground to background, whether it's a sense of spiritual development from a lower level to a higher level, whether it's a sense of development from life through the process of death in the river to the far shore. The idea of the far shore itself, I'm going to cross over Jordan, suggests the idea of a spiritual fulfillment, which many see death as being the final chapter. And of course, it's a completely natural process. Okay, let me draw your attention again. I'll point, look at the face shape, look at the two eyes, look at a nose area with a tower or tree and two figures on the far shore, and a mouth created both by perhaps a figure swimming across the river. One can even imagine the idea of the soul going across, protected by the hand becomes a mouth, and of course the chin. So the key points of the picture, aside from the structure of the figures, which become relatively impersonal, they are no longer human individuals, they're not struggling, they become generic humanity. A hole with a cloth, this indefinite shape going across the picture to these two tiny little, this is the goal, these two tiny figures, and perhaps going up through the towers and the trees to heaven or the other world. Of course there's structure, of course there's Cézanne's use of color to build form, the triangle of the trees almost becoming hair of a female figure. Those are all important structural elements in Cézanne, but everybody's aware of that. Everybody knows that. We're trying to discuss something that many people may not think, and when you see the Cézanne exhibit, you'll see some of this underlying emotionalism. Okay, in the first picture here, look at the focus on the far building. This is late Cézanne. This is not in the exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, but look at the focus on the building across the shore. This, again, gives the idea of quest, of a personal goal. It may almost be the idea that Cézanne has identified with that far building, and in that psychological sense, it becomes him. In a design sense as well, because you put that tiny object and focus upon it, and it has a sense of identity with the artist. It's like Hopper's buildings, it's like Vincent van Gogh's old shoes, it's like the chair, it's like Van Gogh's bedroom. It's that same kind of personal, interior, psychological, emotional quality. Okay, let's go to the next picture. And we see a painting that of the Chateau Noir on exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art. Look at the symbolic, emotional quality of this. This house, chateau, looking almost like a skull with gaping teeth hiding on the hilltop, partly coming forward, partly obscured by the tree, surrounded by this immense darkness. It's the idea of a certain threat in the picture, a certain tumult and almost melodrama, but there's such powerful drama, such stark emotionalism in this picture. This is not the Cézanne of the cubists, of the structuralists, of the formalists. This is a strong expressionist individual. Compare this one with the next picture. Keep this one in mind, and we go to the next one, the Bay of Marseille, viewed from La Stock, painted in that classic mid-period in the 1880s, early 90s, and look at the sense of harmonious wholeness, of calm and peace and balance and order. This is Cézanne at his most, where there is most equilibrium in his art, the most sense of wholeness and balance between structure and emotionalism. This is a a classic example of the classic romantic balance here in the picture. Okay, we'll go to the next one, and we see one of his late quarry pictures, this one on exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art. And notice the tree. We'll focus on the tree at the top of the picture. We'll get the whole picture, but we'll pull away but keep in mind the tree, and let's pull back in the shot so we can get an idea of the total picture. That tree rises above the tumult and the thrusting triangle diagonal of the rock at the bottom of the picture, rises as a point of aspiration, as another goal symbol for Cézanne. And it's this unspoken contrast in the picture between the rocky turmoil beneath, the rocky structure, and that rising tree. We'll equate that tree with his insistent painting and repainting of Mount Saint-Victoire from many, many angles. This is Cézanne focusing in on himself, focusing in on some of his final goals in life. And we'll proceed to the next picture, painted again in that calm mid-period. This will be painted 10 years or 15 years before the famous quarry pictures that he worked on in the last few years of his life. And we'll see in the picture Mount Saint-Victoire looking through a vista. Again, remember the vistas, the openings in the center of the pictures of the Bacchanal and the two bathers. Remember the focusing on of the house across the lake in the late Cézanne. Look at him go through the pine trees to focus on Mount Saint-Victoire. He paints it over and over and over and over again. There may be 20 Mount Saint-Victoires, different versions of it, at the Museum of Modern Art. And it's not just a search for structure. It's not just a search for receding planes of depth being built up by shape, form, and color in the foreground and the mountains themselves, although that's part of it. But as important as the structural sense in Cézanne is the emotional quality, this focusing on this object that suggests that Cézanne is seeking himself, is seeking an eternal truth. Mountains have always, in their strength, been the dwelling place of the gods, in their altitude, their amplitude, their inaccessibility to a degree, and in their power, in their strength, just in the massive substance of the earth and rock itself, suggests power and strength. And it's almost as if he's praying at the foot of an idol, but of course that sounds a little disparaging. The mountain becomes almost Cézanne's God symbol, I would say. Okay, let's go to the next picture. Painted during the same mid-period. Neither Mount Saint-Victoire nor this view of the town of Gardin, painted in the mid-1880s, are in the show at the Modern. But look at the tower, the church tower that towers over the picture. This is the whole reason for that picture. Certainly, he's interested in the structure, the relationship of planes, of front and sides of buildings that he sees very simply, very solidly. And that's part of his formal interest in structure. And this is where the Cubists go bananas with Cézanne, because they focus just on this sense of structure and the angularity of it and the faceting of his pictures. And they missed the emotional quality, the romantic quality, the expressionist quality in Cézanne, and the symbolic power that's in Cézanne. That tower at the top is the goal, is the equivalent of Mount Saint-Victoire, is the goal that Cézanne aspires to. Let's take another view at a different version of view of Gardin, and we'll see the same qualities. The rising, the aspirational quality of the surmounting church tower and structure is somewhat diminished because of its association, as he views it from another point, with the hill on the left, but it's still there, this sense of climbing, climbing, climbing up through the beautifully painted forms, the wonderful orange-red tans that are so usual with Cézanne and his blue and violet shadows, blue-gray shadows, and the trees, softening of the trees, enhancing the rugged mechanical man-made structure of the buildings. Okay, we'll go to the next picture, another view of Mount Saint-Victor. Look at the sense of vista again, looking through the opening, almost like gun sights of the pine trees. Mount Saint-Victor makes its mysterious, mystical, yet surprisingly dominant appearance here, despite the fact that it's subordinate to the darkness of the trees and in altitude. Mount Saint-Victor is the goal that this artist is in quest of in terms of psychology, in terms of his spiritual development, in terms of his personal, emotional, and intellectual development. Yes, the picture is a magnificent landscape. It's solidly painted. We see the development of space from foreground through background, through color, and through linear accent, certain sharply depicted selected buildings, and of course the viaduct in the background. And this landscape is called Landscape with Viaduct, Mount Saint-Victor. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Another Mount Saint-Victor. We have two more Mount Saint-Victors to take a look at. A late watercolor. And we'll talk about Cézanne's watercolors in just a minute, but they become almost a mystical expression. His oils retain a solidity and a substance, perhaps due to the material of the oil itself. His watercolors become very evanescent and fleeting, although he's working to get the form down, and he does, but he repeats the color planes so many times that the forms begin to flicker, and in his buildings and so forth, and he'll stress pinks and oranges and blues, and they have this marvelous spiritual quality. Mount Saint-Victor, the goal, surmounting the life below it. And I suppose if we want to carry the analogy farther, we could say that the plain leading to Mount Saint-Victor is the everyday arena of life, and the mountain becomes the goal for spiritual enlightenment or spiritual development, a higher plane. Okay, we'll take a look at another Mount Saint-Victor. This one, I believe, is one version that's in the Museum of Modern Art, and in his last 10 years, and you can see the simplification that's taken place. The delineation of foreground objects is entirely muted. They become simply color patches that advance and build a sense of advancement through color and light and dark. And Mount Saint-Victor, almost like an iceberg rising in the distance, or the 30-60 triangle of a sinking hulk of a ship, pointing upward toward the final goal. This mountain is the personal symbol of Cézanne, is his quest, is his goal. And powerfully symbolic, powerfully expressive pictures. Okay. Moving right along, we'll briefly, I'll tell you, I think we'll start here. And we'll take a look at another late Cézanne in the exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. His painting of the quarry that he was so fond of painting, and of course his fondness and his interest in it reveals to us the fact that there's something in that site, something in that environment that is the equivalent of his inner being. That is Cézanne again. The artist, as we say, paints himself, whether he selects his landscape, he selects his still life, he selects the people he paints. Look at the chaos, not chaos, there's a sense of order, but it's almost the feeling of an aftershock. The earthquake of life, if we want to go that far, we don't have to say that. The earthquake has passed, and things are in slight disarray. There are photographs of the quarry, if you haven't seen it in person, and I haven't, at the museum, that show that these diagonal lines are really vertical, particularly in the background section, and that he tips and tilts to express his own emotionalism. The Cubists decided, I believe, and I could be wrong, but it's my feeling at the moment anyway, that they saw these angles simply as placed that way simply because the artist was thinking of design, you know, in sort of a rational sense, and was after a dynamic structural presentation. But I think it was from emotional necessity that this crumbling change took place, that this sense of diagonal, sloping, slanting, sliding quality. See, this is why I say in late Cézanne, after the mid-period balance equation of classical with romantic, the emotionalism, the romantic comes back to the fore with the structural quality a little bit subordinate. Let's go to the next picture. Keep in mind the sense of cataclysm, of movement, dynamism that we just saw in Cézanne's Quarry, and we go to a late drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, of all people, entitled Cataclysm. At the end of his life, da Vinci draws these fantastic torrents, these fantastic upheavals of earth and nature, as if to say, almost to invoke a destruction of the world, you know, through the power of nature, or expressing some of the violence and the strength of nature in her fiercest moods. It's almost as people will do when they grow older. They feel that not only are they ending, but the world is ending as well. And it's perhaps, and of course it goes on and on and on until finally we do blow it up. But this is perhaps very expressive of Leonardo's old age, perhaps a semi-embittered old age. And I'm not saying Cézanne's embittered, but that his works begin to have this final universal cataclysmic reality and sense of destruction and movement. Okay, let's go to the next picture, and we'll see a late Cézanne watercolor study of rocks at that same quarry. And this picture is more controlled, but somehow it's nature in microcosm, almost in the same way that da Vinci is expressing nature. There's something very essential being expressed here in these forms. He loves the solidity of them, but they become shifting and evanescent and lumpy, and they're nowhere near as chaotic and cataclysmic as da Vinci, but I have a feeling that they are a final statement by Cézanne of the nature of the universe as da Vinci made his statement 300 or 400 years ago. Okay, let's go to the next picture. A house among the trees, and painted from nature, but we wouldn't know it because of the near abstract quality of it. The house on the left is certain simple rectangular structures, the trees in the right center, semicircular structures. He's getting to the heart of reality. He's getting to the basic structure of it. And again, although this is ordered and controlled, I think he's making a final statement as equivalent to da Vinci's statement. And it would be wrong to say that Cézanne would move into total abstraction. All his oils are still solid and realistic. It's only in his watercolors where he makes these, they're almost notes, that we're almost like looking at an artist's diary. Okay, let's go to this picture right here. What a journey. What a journey this man made in discovering himself, in coming to grips with himself, in extending himself, and finally realizing himself, his personal potential, as he realized his form on the canvas, to use his own term, his sense of realization. Look at this early washing of the corpse. Look at the sense of proportion. Look at certain sexual implications in the exaggerated size of the central figure, which of course is Cézanne himself, that familiar bald head of his, the powerful forearms, a sense of a Christ-like figure but working in the crotch area, and the total loss of proportion, the arms disappearing far below, under the table someplace, but what emotional power. Let's go to the next picture. Cézanne reaches apotheosis and control and fulfillment in pictures like this still life with plaster Cupid. It's perhaps somewhat theatrical and over-literary of me to see the corpse finally standing and reborn as this young, vital figure. To see that figure dominating the picture with the dark cloth behind it, that dark emotionalism. But Cézanne is so pregnant with significance that I think we should take chances to realize some of the emotional depths of the man, some of the incredible range of the man, some of the incredible stubbornness of the man, some of the incredible faith of the man in isolation in southern France, ignored, laughed at, who fought the good fight and fought it right to the end.